South Africa's top representative at the UN is guilty of accepting funding from terror supporters. Let's get into this. A few months ago, controversy hit in South Africa when Tlaleng Mofokeng, who is the UN's Special Rapporteur on the right to health, landed herself in a lot of hot water. You see, because of some controversial statements she made that were not only racist, anti-Western, and then anti-Israel, she actually ended up being condemned by the South African Health Professions Council. And even though the United Nations decided not to take any action, the fact that this council did is quite telling because, of course, we know where the South African government, or specifically the ANC, stands when it comes to the West and Israel and even racial incidents. And ultimately, one can imagine the kind of backlash that they may have faced. But what's ultimately even more shocking than Mofokeng's downright discriminatory and inappropriate remarks is who actually seems to be influencing her behavior. You see, Mofokeng has been accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding from certain people who actually happen to be aligned with terrorists. Now, before we get into this investigation, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's entirely free and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below. If you would like to support the channel and enjoy additional perks such as members-only videos, you can do so by becoming a Power Club member. All you have to do is click on the join button below. Now let's get into it. So Mofokeng's problematic funding ties actually came to light thanks to this groundbreaking report from UN Watch titled From Watchdogs to Ideologues. Now, for any of you who might not know, UN Watch is a watchdog that monitors the United Nations behavior. And so they've been very big in calling out some of their biggest controversies. And of course, this revelation is no different. Now, before we jump into Mofokeng's funding sources, I think it's very important for us to understand what makes her so controversial, as it is only once we discuss her behavior that it's actually going to make a lot of sense to see who is funding her and why her behavior has gone in this direction. So let's begin by looking at her pattern of anti-Western hostility and ideological extremism. So Mofokeng exhibits consistent hostility towards Western states, particularly the United States, and we've seen this through highly personal attacks. For example, she has labeled Donald Trump a fascist, and even told him to stay home from a meeting with South Africa's president. But what was also pretty shocking is how her disdain isn't only directed at the United States. You see, she also attacked the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, calling him filthy and drunk, effed up, after he issued statements on illegal immigration. And so we can already see how uncouth she can be. It's also important to note that she's been very complimentary to Cuba, which is, of course, a communist dictatorship. And she also, as we can see here, venerated one of the violent leaders of Cuba's Marxist revolution, Che Guevara, retweeting his claim that the United States is the perpetrator of exploitation and oppression against the peoples of the world, and affectionately referring to him as grandfather. Now, it is actually important to note that she's decided to promote prostitution to teens, which is quite peculiar to say the least. But as problematic as this is not the focus of this discussion. What's more important for the purposes of this report is her pattern of profanity, racist abuse, and unprofessional conduct as highlighted in this paragraph. So we see how she consistently uses abusive language on her X feed and has basically referred to people as that hoe and a disgusting elder. And so when certain people decided to disagree with her views on the COVID-19 vaccine, Mofokeng, who is of course the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health, responded by telling them to shove it up your ass. And so yet again, we just see how inappropriate she is and just unprofessional. Now, her real attacks against Israel and the Jews started in January 2025, when she simply tweeted that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should F off. When the UN Watch's executive director Hillel Neuer called for her to be disciplined for inappropriate conduct, Mofokeng launched into a racist tirade against him, referring to Neuer as an evil scum and white man. While the UN took no action, the South African Health Professions Council found her guilty of misconduct, as I explained before. And what they found is that she was guilty on the grounds of using abusive and inappropriate language on social media and bringing the health profession into disrepute. But despite this finding, Mofokeng still decided to double down, and she actually attacked them, and she ended up dismissing the council's findings on social media, accusing critics of weaponizing medical ethics. And so ultimately, there is just no curtailing her kind of behavior. What is particularly worrying about Mofokeng, apart from the fact that she supports the boycott of Israel, is that she actually fundamentally rejects Israel's right to exist. So as we can see here, she has continuously tweeted the eliminationist slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," accompanied by a map erasing Israel. And so ultimately, if you're seriously going to say that you don't want Israel anywhere on that map, what you are essentially calling for is the erasure of the Israeli people. It really is that simple. Now, beyond that, we've also seen her endorse Hamas terrorists. Mofokeng's first public response after October the 7th was to actually justify the violence. In a thread on X, she wrote, "You cannot extinguish the human desire for freedom." She then stated that Hamas fighters who documented their own mass atrocities on October the 7th are not terrorists, and has explicitly endorsed their armed struggle. We of course see her attacking Rishi Sunak yet again in May 2024, when she told him to shut up after he expressed solidarity with Israeli victims and affirmed Israel's right to self-defense. Now you might be wondering at this point, well, who exactly is pushing Mofokeng to behave in this depraved fashion? And we actually find that according to UN Watch's research, Georgetown University has given her $250,000 as a donation in 2024. Now you might be wondering, well, what's wrong with that? You see, on the surface, Georgetown seems perfectly fine. It's a private American university based in Washington, D.C., and it happens to be Catholic. However, what we see when we peel back the layers is that Georgetown itself seems to have been captured by radicals. So I decided to do some research on the US Department of Education's website. And here they have a dashboard giving all of the foreign funding that's been accepted by US universities. Now, what we need to remember is that for those of you who've been following the channel, Qatar happens to be one of the largest funders, if not the largest funder, of US colleges. And this is quite a shock because ultimately Qatar is a very small country. It's about 500,000 people. It's basically an island. Yet they contribute more money to US universities than anyone else, including the likes of China, Russia, India, Brazil, massive countries such as those. Now, as we go down the dashboard, we can see that of the $72.1 billion in funding that has been disclosed from foreign funders, $8.8 billion is from Qatar. And so they are the biggest funder of US colleges by a mile. But what's really problematic is that as soon as we scroll down the page, we see that Georgetown University is one of the biggest recipients of foreign funding, with $1.5 billion in foreign funding. Now, if we take a look at who has been funding this university, we see that of the $1.4 billion that have been received, $1.1 billion alone came from Qatar. And so what that effectively means is that approximately 79% of all of Georgetown's international funding comes from one country. That's right, Qatar, a constant ally of Iran and its proxies around the Middle East, which include Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, what's important for us to note is that, yes, of course, this kind of foreign funding does indeed influence a university and the track that it takes, especially when it comes to allowing anti-Israel protests and encampments, as we've seen, as well as certain changes to curriculums. But what's more important is that Qatar has also been getting involved on the ground in Georgetown University, which of course funds Mofokeng. Middle East Forum has conducted an investigation into this issue, and what they've actually found is that Georgetown University is the epicenter of Qatari influence in American colleges. It explains here how, of course, as I mentioned, Qatar has funded the university. According to this report, it's $971 million. However, I'm guessing that's because the report is just slightly outdated on its figures. Remember, the dashboard that I showed you is in real time. We then see most notably how the financial dependence is particularly consequential at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service, the United States' premier training ground for diplomats and foreign policy leaders. And so ultimately, we see how these Qataris are influencing Georgetown, which of course is the home of diplomats and diplomats in training for the United States. And so understandably so, the Qataris are managing to influence Georgetown, which in turn influences Mofokeng. But it gets deeper. You see, Qatar has strategically funded 4 endowed chairs in Muslim societies, Islamic history, Indian politics, and Arab studies, elevating faculty whose work consistently advances anti-Western narratives while remaining conspicuously silent on authoritarian abuses within Qatar and the broader Middle East. What's also incredibly problematic is that Qatar's influence now extends into Georgetown's governance, with Sheikh Abdullah bin Ali Al Thani, the son of the former Emir of Qatar, which is Qatar's leader, a member of the university's board of directors, thereby embedding Qatari interests at the highest level of institutional decision-making in America's capital. And so ultimately what we see here is an incredibly troubling chain of funding. We see how the Qataris have continued their infiltration into US universities, particularly Georgetown, which is the heart of public diplomacy and training in America. In turn, Georgetown has funded Mofokeng to the tune of $250,000, and very clearly they are happy with her conduct because she has continued on her anti-Western, anti-Israel, and downright racist tirade without any hint of changing course. While the South African Health Council did decide to condemn her for her behavior, the United Nations has remained silent, and so it seems as if this destructive path will continue. Thank you very much for tuning into the video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.